Hello, my name is Thomas Meyers, and for the student conference, I chose to do my Massacre project that I completed for my Honors World History class. First, I would like to issue an apology for not having my camera on. I unfortunately learned that you do not have the option to toggle the camera on and off while recording, and I have pictures that my camera would cover. That being said, we'll get right into it. So first up, I have my thesis statement and outline. My thesis statement for the project is: the Massacre had underlying causes which led to its fruition and eventual repercussions. As for my outline, the events leading up to the massacre, events of the massacre, and events after the massacre and the subsequent government cover-up. So now we'll switch to the key players of the Massacre, and that responsibility lies solely in Charlie Company. This is a picture of some of Charlie Company, but not all of it. They were part of the 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, 11th Infantry Brigade, and they were commanded by Captain Ernest Medina. They were also led by Lieutenant William Calley. Following the Tet Offensive, they had just about 100 men in their company, so not very big. So the events leading to the massacre. Charlie Company is still dealing with losses following the Tet Offensive in 1968. For those of you not familiar, the Tet Offensive was an attack launched by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces on the South Vietnamese and the Americans during the Lunar New Year celebration, also known as Tet. This attack took the Americans and South Vietnamese by surprise and was a critical turning point in the war. Now back to the presentation. Charlie Company, along with 2 other companies, were tasked with eliminating the 48th Battalion. The 48th Battalion was a group of the Viet Cong soldiers that the American intelligence could not find for months. The intelligence they did have, however, suggested that the 48th Battalion was operating in the Quang Nguai province. Charlie Company had previously been searching for them for over a month, and intelligence suggested that the 48th Battalion had taken refuge in My Lai village. Continuing on the events leading to the massacre, we have on March 15th, 1968, Captain Medina briefs Charlie Company. He explains that civilians have already left for the Quang Nguai city. Anyone left is Viet Cong or a Viet Cong sympathizer. And under the rules of engagement, soldiers were permitted to fire at anything and anyone. Also, soldiers were also ordered to kill livestock and burn crops. Now for the events of the massacre. The massacre took place on March 16th, 1968. At 7:30 in the morning, My Lai was shelled by U.S. artillery. Shortly after, Charlie Company invades the city, led by Lieutenant Calley. They find quiet villages with elderly men, women, and children. Soldiers found weapons and inspected them. Albeit finding very few weapons, Calley ordered the soldiers to fire upon the villagers rounded up in a ditch. According to eyewitness reports offered after the event, several old men were bayoneted, praying women and children were shot in the back of the head, and at least 1 girl was raped and then killed. Continuing the events, Sergeant Michael Bernhardt told a reporter, "I saw them shoot an M79, a grenade launcher, into a group of people who were still alive, but it was mostly done with a machine gun. They were shooting women and children just like anybody else." Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson ended the massacre. Upon returning from a refueling mission, Thompson spotted piles of dead civilians from his helicopter and decided to land. Thompson landed his helicopter in between a group of survivors and Charlie Company. Continuing the events, we have Thompson had Lawrence Colburn, the door gunner, and Glenn Andrada, crew chief, operate their weapons and aim for Charlie Company. Thompson called for more helicopters as they escorted surviving civilians to medical care. So essentially what happened is you had Charlie Company come into a village, find little to no weapons and civilians. Under their orders, they were told anybody left were Viet Cong or Viet Cong sympathizers. So they blatantly opened fire on all of the civilians until Hugh Thompson spotted them, landed a helicopter in between the Vietnamese citizens and the American Army. At the end, 504 people were dead. Among the victims were 182 women, 17 of them pregnant, and 173 children, including 56 infants. After the massacre is all over, there is obviously a cover-up. Charlie Company returned to base, and commanding officers told a watered-down version of what happened. They returned and they told their superior officers, hey, this is what happened, but it's not as bad as what actually happened there. Hugh Thompson then returned to base and protested that there was an intentional massacre of unarmed civilians. The official report came out on April 24, 1968, by Colonel Orrin Henderson, commander of the 11th Infantry Brigade. The official report stated 20 civilians were accidentally killed in crossfire and initial artillery bombing. Thompson was then assigned to dangerous missions with little air cover as a result, and he broke his back on the final mission where he crashed for a 6th-time total over all the missions he was assigned. Continuing on the government cover-up, nobody knew of the massacre, and word did not reach the U.S. government until a lone soldier of the 11th Brigade had gathered enough evidence. Beginning in April 1968, Ron Ridenhour had collected eyewitness testimonies for the remainder of his tour. Ridenhour would sit in the bunkers and talk to eyewitness accounts and record what they said and basically ask for their opinion on if the events of My Lai actually happened the way they said, or there was a deeper, more violent situation. No longer with the Army and safely at home, Ridenhour mailed his findings to everyone in Washington, including Congress and the Pentagon, on March 29, 1969. Now, with a cover-up, there comes an investigation, but another cover-up. With reports from Ridenhour, the U.S. government investigated the events of the My Lai massacre, or as Ridenhour wrote it, the Pink Belt Incident. On September 1969, Lieutenant Calley is arrested for murder of 109 Vietnamese civilians. These events are kept quiet from the public, and Ridenhour decides to give an interview with journalist Seymour Hersh in November 1968. With the news to the public, there's going to be some trials. But first, in November 1969, Hersh published the story of the massacre, and it won the 1970 Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting. With the public informed on this tragedy, the U.S. Army began a separate investigation. Led by Lieutenant General William Piers, the investigation began on November 26, 1969. Ending with the official report published on March 14, 1970, Piers suggested that at least 28 men be tried for initial cover-up. On to the trials. November 17, 1970, the My Lai trial begins. Only 14 men were tried and all were acquitted except Calley. March 1971, Calley was sentenced to life in prison for the killing of 22 Vietnamese citizens. Keep in mind, the initial report said 20 civilians were killed and that 28 people be tried for cover-up. But here we have one lone man take the sole blame of a war crime. Following the sentence, Calley had his sentence reduced multiple times through appeals until he eventually gained parole in 1974. Years later in Columbus, he was asked about the events of the My Lai massacre, and he went on the record to say, "There is not a day that goes by that I do not feel remorse for what happened that day in My Lai." I feel remorse for the Vietnamese who were killed and for their families, for the American soldiers involved and their families. I am very sorry. Overall, this was a very tragic incident, and at the end of the day, it was a war crime committed by a man and his company, and he got away with it, basically. He still went to jail, but not as long as some would have hoped. And here are my sources. I hope you found this presentation very informal, and I hope it highlighted one of the lesser known events during the Vietnam War. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will be happy to answer. Thank you.